Hi, I'm Jim Falk, and thank you for joining us. Across the globe, efforts are underway to develop green energy with the goal of reducing our dependence on oil and gas and coal to eventually reduce emissions. While much of the discussion centers on renewables, namely solar and wind, nuclear energy is also seen by many as a very important component. Now, according to a recent survey done by the Pew Research Center, Americans are increasingly supportive of nuclear energy. Detractors, however, warn not so fast, calling out what they see as risks caused by climate change, high capital cost, and the potential threat arising from a military strike causing a catastrophe. Now, bringing their different perspectives to these important questions, let's welcome now our two experts. First, joining us from right outside of Paris is Dr. Paul Dorfman. He's an associate fellow, a science policy research unit at the University of Sussex. He's also a member of the Irish Government Radiation Protection Advisory Committee and chairs the Nuclear Consulting Group, which brings together leading academics and experts in the fields of renewable energy technology, economics, and the environment. Now, here right next to me in our Dallas studio is Mark Nelson. He's the founder and managing director of Radiant Energy Group. That's a Chicago-based consulting firm that advises corporations, organizations on clean energy strategies. Mr. Nelson holds a master's in nuclear engineering from Cambridge University across the pond. This is such an important topic, and yet I have to tell both of you, I was so surprised during the Republican and Democratic conventions that if nuclear was mentioned, I certainly don't remember it. Why do you think that is?
At the moment in the United States is because both the Republican Party and the Democratic Party have decided that nuclear is an essential part of their energy programs. On the Democratic side, they see it as an essential part of decarbonizing the grid and our energy supply. On the Republican side, they see it as an essential part of protecting jobs and American manufacturing by providing a large amount of stable energy.
Yeah, but it really wasn't mentioned.
I think there's some confusion about what to do on a topic where there's so much agreement. There's agreement in the voting, there's agreement in Congress, there's even continuity from the White Houses, from Trump to Biden, on pursuing nuclear energy. It makes it a difficult topic to talk about, I think. I definitely would have preferred to hear something about it, especially from the Democrats being in Chicago at a nuclear-powered stadium. I think it would have been a good chance to mention American can-do attitude delivering clean energy already. But
now I'm sitting here with this chart that was recently issued by the Pew Research Center, and it says majority of Americans continue to support more nuclear power in the United States, and it's up now to about 56%. That's in the United States. Paul, what are we seeing in Europe?
Okay, but I mean, we can turn to the United States first. In terms of actual, government investment, so current government investment in power, about 2% of all current government investment, 2024, is nuclear. The rest is renewables and a small amount of gas. So in terms of the difference between the rhetoric and the reality, we see where America is heading. In terms of Europe, that's a potentially a different discourse. There's the big sort of Barney, the big sort of tete-a-tete is between France and Germany. Germany, the largest economy in Europe, says no nuclear. France, on the other hand, likes the idea of nuclear. However, it has to be said that EDF France had to be 100% nationalized recently by the French government because of its debt load.
So you're saying a great deal of government support in Europe. And recently in the United States, there was a tremendous amount of money put into nuclear through, I think it's called the ACT Act, and also through the Inflation Reduction Act. How much subsidies are we seeing in the U.S. government to support the expansion of nuclear plants?
now, providing the ability to pursue subsidies for the companies that want nuclear is one thing. I think Paul's right in that we have not yet seen that expansion of investment yet. In specific cases, nuclear plants in the United States are getting renovated or even bigger capacities. They're getting equipment that's more powerful to allow more power output, using provisions of these government bills to allow them to finance at cheaper rates. But at the moment, we are still waiting for all the money that potentially hundreds of billions of dollars made available under the Inflation Reduction Act. We're still waiting to see people take the plunge and sign up to start new nuclear construction.
So when you say take the plunge, what are we talking about? Are we talking about investors that are going to participate along with the U.S. government, or companies reticent, or is it not in my backyard?
Honestly, not in my backyard may be one of the smallest problem nuclear now faces. For one, you yourself mentioned the bipartisan support for nuclear power. Now, that's not just supporting it when you vote for somebody to go off in Washington. We're seeing states having lots of pro-nuclear legislation come up, and those are locally elected politicians. Even more importantly, nuclear plants across America are undersized compared to what their original planning was. So if a nuclear plant in the US has 1 or maybe 2 reactors, almost all of those plants were originally planned for more. The great slowdown of nuclear energy in the West from 1980s and 90s, that canceled a lot of those plans. So when I say that companies are waiting to take the plunge, I mean companies that already own and operate American nuclear plants with room and sometimes even permits to expand today. They are waiting to decide how and when and if they're going to expand their nuclear power plants.
You know, I'm glad you talked about the size of the plants, because I have this vision of gigantic footprints. Are nuclear plants becoming smaller now and more efficient?
Nuclear power is an extremely compact way to make energy. Some of the buildings outside of the central reactor containment building might be larger. So for example, if you are not located on a seacoast or a giant lake, you may find it useful to build one of those large, famous cooling towers to help you get more cooling with less water flow through your plant. But in general, nuclear plants that are, say, located along highways, like they are near where I live in Chicago, you can pass the nuclear plant in your car in just a few seconds and you'll miss it. So they're very small facilities compared to the millions that they power. The buildings themselves look large when you're standing in front of them. Nuclear plant design is tending more towards simplicity of the internals of the nuclear plant. Sometimes that means taking up a little bit more area outside of the reactor in order to ensure the same levels of safety with a less complicated internal structure.
Paul, I've read a number of your articles, and you make a very compelling case why we should put our focus on renewables and less on nuclear. And I'd like to go through some of those and have both of you respond. And of course, one is the impact of climate change.
The motivation behind new nuclear, especially in America, does seem to be financial. So the nuclear industry seems to have quietly changed its business model from making and selling products to harvesting subsidies for development. So there's this question about, where the money is coming from. The reality, of course, is that nuclear cannot survive without substantive public subsidy. As we've seen in Vogtle Summer, the only nuclear power plant to be constructed in the US, which is vastly overcost and vastly over time. Now, in terms of climate, what's important to note is that all of a sudden, everybody seems to have woken up, where people like me have been discussing it for 30 years. This is what is happening. Climate is happening. Now, the problem with nuclear, one of the major problems with nuclear, apart from the financial and the delays, is that basically nuclear needs to be situated beside large bodies of water, rivers, or the sea, or the coast. Now, we know what's going to happen with the coast. Now, we hope that sea level will be stepwise change. The problem with the coast, of course, is that it's not simply the sea level rise that we're concerned with, but it's storm level surge. Now, the US military has already published on this and says that something like 50 or so US nuclear installations are at risk, are vulnerable to climate. So the idea that nuclear is a sort of a salvation for climate is deeply, deeply problematic. The reality is, unfortunately, the reality is that it's likely that coastal nuclear, and there's a lot of coastal nuclear, will be subject to storm surge flooding within about a decade. Inland, we know what's happening in the rivers. The rivers are drying up.
I think what stands out to me is that a country like the Netherlands is on average nearly at sea level. Netherlands, with the best flood engineers and scientists in the world, with every bit of knowledge of what they have to prepare for with rising sea levels, not only is extending the life of its nuclear plant located at sea level, they're adding more nuclear if the current government's plans go forward. So although I understand that Paul looks at this issue, in Netherlands it's not an issue of promoting this or that technology, it's life and death. And one of the most flood vulnerable countries on the planet is pursuing nuclear because they've taken a look at the risks of sea level rise, and they see that nuclear is an energy source that you can use your engineering to protect. It's millions of people's worth of power in a tiny space. You build the seawalls and prepare for the disasters that would take out entire cities outside of the plant.
Well, let me ask you about something else that really concerns me because we're seeing it in real time, and that is the security of these nuclear plants. I mean, in Ukraine, at Zaporizhzhia, they have the largest plant in all of Europe, and it's basically been held hostage over the last over 2 years. And we're talking United States about the possibility of helping Saudi Arabia build plants. I mean, that seems like a really serious problem that could lead to very adverse consequences, whether it's in a conflict that was somewhat unexpected or a terrorist act. Paul?
Yes, I mean, what we're learning, of course, is that nuclear power plants are vulnerable in an increasingly unstable world. We've looked at Zaporizhzhia, Chernobyl, now Kursk. I've worked with the Omani government and the Qatar government in the context of Saudi and also the UAE construction of Baraka. The key problem with nuclear, unfortunately, is that it's a sort of de facto target in an increasingly vulnerable, increasingly unstable world. And although IAEA are sort of making, the International Atomic Energy Agency are making noises about this in terms of Zaporizhzhia, in terms of Kursk, the problem is that this very key issue really has not been addressed. And it is really something to consider very, very seriously.
And even though, the sort of loose rules of war say that nuclear plants should never be at risk, they are.
I'll just say that Ukraine is possibly the most pro-nuclear country I'm aware of in the world at the moment. The majority of their electricity comes from nuclear, and it's their nuclear plants in the territory they control they've been able to protect. Unfortunately, their fossil fuel plants have been damaged or mostly destroyed. A lot of people may freeze to death this winter in Ukraine because only the nuclear plants remain in operation in the war zone. So does that mean nuclear should be pursued or not be pursued? I think that nuclear is a human technology that exists in human society, and one of the things that we apparently still do is make war. Zaporizhzhia nuclear plant was the largest in Europe. It was attacked and taken by Russian invasion forces while operating, remaining in operation for several months. It achieved safe shutdown, all of this under wartime conditions, compelled labor at the plant, the grid constantly being damaged and knocked off, and the grid is important for helping protect nuclear plants. And all of this is being used to show that nuclear is dangerous. I think that's a very odd conclusion to draw from one of the only really positive bright spots in the story of this awful fratricidal war between Russia and Ukraine.
Well, I think it's something to really to keep our eye on. You've recently done a study on gender gap of who supports nuclear power. You've also looked at it, I know, Paul, you've looked at some of it from the political areas, whether one is right-wing, left-wing, Democratic, Republican. Let's explore that a bit. We're seeing more women tend to be less supportive of nuclear. Why is that? A question of concern about security? Safety?
When we've looked at this, it's a little bit more difficult to determine exactly why, but what seems to be the case is women are much less certain of their opinion on a subject like nuclear, and men, informed or less informed, tend to be more willing to stake out a position and go for it. Now, it's not the same in all countries. Possibly the most interesting thing we found is that in India, women and men both approve of nuclear and support it quite strongly as a population, so similarly that it's within the margin of error. This is to be strongly contrasted with a country like Russia, where although the population as a whole is strongly pro-nuclear, there's a very large split between men and women on their support for nuclear power. So when we're trying to understand this, we're looking at it less as men and women in the whole world and a little bit more on what in each society is giving rise to the gender gap of a given size. As far as I can tell, because concern about nuclear energy has typically been part of the story of nuclear war or radiation contamination, for women who are very concerned about the health of the body or of the family, there may have been much more uncertainty and fear towards any of the arguments about nuclear energy that it would explode or contaminate or would lead to more nuclear war.
Paul, what about one's political views? How does that affect one's perception and support of nuclear power?
It varies. It tends to vary. I mean, largely, the reality is the market has fled new nuclear. Okay, the finance market won't touch new nuclear with a barge pole. It simply won't. So therefore, new nuclear can either be built with vast public subsidies, or sort of strange sort of fiscal shenanigans like we found in Vogel, where the local community have been left with, because of sort of a sort of funding model, the local community being left with billions and billions and billions of debt that will go on their electricity bills. You're seeing build in China, you're seeing build in Russia, and you're seeing a promise to build in China and Russian influence zones. That said, in terms of China, the astonishing thing about China is that China is putting down more renewables every week than nuclear puts down, hang on, I'll check with this. China is putting down more renewables every week than nuclear is putting down every decade or so. So the politically, there's all kinds of shenanigans as to, what's going on. In my view, basically what seems to have happened is that people all of a sudden have woken up to climate change. Good heavens, who knew that we were entering an existential problem? And in terms of politics and in terms of the way people are thinking, the first thing to do is reach out for some sort of technological easy fix that we think may resolve this problem. The key problem with nuclear is this, and this is really the key problem. Nuclear is just too late. It takes between 14 and 17 years in terms of planning, regulation, and construction to build just one nuclear power plant.
Paul, let me stop you there and just ask you, when you say it takes that long, is that all over the world? Is that a global issue?
That's global figures from the UK government.
I would think China could do it quicker.
Not necessarily, and we're always worried about Chinese numbers as well too. And in terms of what's being built in China, there's a distinction between old nuclear build and new nuclear build. Now, after Fukushima, everybody realized that nuclear was potentially a little bit more dangerous than we thought it was. So there's a so-called Fukushima, post-Fukushima upgrades in terms of the new kind of designs that you could put down. Now, a lot of what's being built in China are these old style stuff that nobody really knows about and everybody's kind of worried about.
Yes, so China is currently able to add new nuclear reactors at existing plants in about 4 to 6 years. And they build both their own design that they've worked on, but they also build America's best design.
Probably not a lot of opposition in China.
Well, look, in the end, if you want to lose power in China, one of the best ways is to piss off a lot of people all at once. And one of the things that I think people misunderstand is that regulation on nuclear in China is not loose. There's an enormous amount of conservatism built into the Chinese regulatory system, even beyond what we have in America. For example, in America, each nuclear plant is taken on its own merits. Does it have access to water? Does it have access to what it needs for the civil infrastructure? In China, nuclear plants are not yet allowed to be built away from the coastline. there are not inland nuclear plants in China. That's because of their extreme regulatory conservatism. Yet, they're still capable of standing up new nuclear reactors in 4 to 6 years. That's quite astonishing considering what Paul shared with us about the rate that they're adding renewables. Why is it that China, adding much of the world's renewables, is also building as much nuclear as the rest of the world put together? That indicates something serious we should look at. And I'll tell you what seems to be happening. Dr. Dorfman says that the market is exiting nuclear. Well, the market is shifting. The world's most valuable companies are American tech companies, and they are strongly pushing nuclear energy.
You say that, but Paul just said that the money is not there.
Was not there when it was thought.
Is not there or was not there?
Was not there when it was thought that you could power data centers and industrial growth on renewables. The problem we're experiencing is that renewables, we've gotten extremely good at developing and deploying. We get the solar panels from China, we build them quickly in large areas like in Texas. What appears to be happening is the value of the electricity coming from the new wind and solar is either very low or it is negative. You have to pay to dump the power. Now, if somebody steps up and provides a transmission system and provides the balancing power and blends it all together and gets you your subsidies that wind and solar apparently still need despite being so cheap, then maybe it looks more reasonable. But because the largest tech companies need an enormous amount of power in one location, they're suddenly discovering what those of us in the engineering world have known all along. Renewables are parts sold separately from the total electricity system.
Well,
nuclear has been holding up the sky on our grids for many decades.
I see Paul smiling. So go ahead, Paul.
Okay, I mean, let's get this straight. Okay, the facts are this: at best, globally, okay, new nuclear adds only as much electricity in a year as new renewables adds every few days. And this is a true fact that sounds extraordinary, but it's actually true. China is now installing wind and solar capacity equivalent to 5 new nuclear reactors every week. Okay, let me repeat that. China is now installing wind and solar capacity equivalent to 5 new nuclear reactors every week. So one can sort of, beat about the bush, if you like, and one could talk about, sort of this idea of nuclear PR or how nuclear is great and all this kind of thing. But the fact is, the International Energy Agency states quite clearly, this is a sort of the key governing body on energy, states quite clearly that renewables will do the heavy lifting for net zero, for the energy transition. A fact is this: 86% of all new power, all new electricity last year, capacity additions, was renewables. 86% of all new power capacity last year was renewables, with nuclear nowhere.
This illustrates a common confusion between capacity and output. The reason that the biggest tech companies in the world are rushing towards nuclear as we speak is because they were told...
Which companies?
So, for example, Microsoft, Amazon, Facebook, and Google are all very seriously exploring what they have to do to get people to build them nuclear plants. In the near term, I have to tell you, they're just going to buy up the power from our existing nuclear plants because they need it more than they need to claim to be 100% renewables power. The difficulty is, Paul is citing capacity numbers. This is not power that you and I get to have at any time of day. It's not power that you get to have at your house as opposed to out in the countryside where the power is developed. The nuclear plants run up to 8 times more than, for example, German solar panels. This means that citing capacity numbers is what got these tech companies into trouble when they thought that there would be a secure energy supply for their expansion. They're turning to nuclear because they cannot get that supply from the wind and solar.
One of the things that we've seen in the last less than a decade is that solar has become so much more efficient. Will we see that with nuclear? I mean, do you envision a time when nuclear will be built quicker and be more efficient?
So existing nuclear plants have gone through a transition from when they were on about 50% of the time to now in the United States when they're on 94, 95% of the time. It's an extraordinary change. That's part of the reason that the big tech companies are looking at nuclear. They see the existing performance and they need more of that, not more of the 20% or the 25% that they get from solar. In terms of will we get better at constructing plants? If there's to be any answer to Dr. Dorfman's correct assertion that we're building a lot more renewables than nuclear, we must get better.
Paul, where do you two agree?
I'm not sure we do. I mean, the IPCC, the International Panel on Climate Change, states quite clearly that currently renewables are 10 times better at CO2 mitigation, climate mitigation, than nuclear. Game over.
That's a misunderstanding of what the IPCC said, unfortunately, which is that before 2030, considering how long that we both agree it takes to set up a nuclear plant, any changes from 2023 onwards are likely to be the technologies that have already received the public support and the financial support that renewables have.
Well, this program turned out just like I hoped it would, where two very smart experts would be able to present different views. You can go to their websites. We're showing it on the screen now so that you can continue with this conversation and follow your dialogue. Really very grateful to both of you who clearly and ably presented strongly held views. Competition in technology, market share, and capital will lead over time to the development, let's all hope, of the most reliable, safe, and cost-efficient base for electricity and power. And while hydrocarbons remain abundant, especially in Texas, they are finite, requiring the development of alternative sources. We've just heard this is a complex subject. We hope that we've given all of you a foundation to consider the arguments for and against nuclear power. As always, thank you for watching Perspectives Matter, where we talk about things that matter with people who care.